Endeavor to be ever cautious, Arisen. Wolves hunt in packs. Releasing in 2012, the first Dragon's Dogma arrived on the scene to a thunderous, mixed reception. Receiving an equal amount of praise, as well as criticism. Some people thought it was too hard with its utter refusal and holding the player's hand. Some, like myself, loved its deep systems and incredible world building, but everyone was in agreement that the game definitely felt rushed in a lot of ways. Dragon's Dogma is a game that I love a lot, and despite finishing it 3 different times, I wouldn't necessarily call myself a DD expert. There's still a lot that I don't really understand, from the title's narrative to a lot of gameplay design decisions. That being said, I think the game is great in spite of its many pacing, story, and overall polish issues. The idea of Dragon's Dogma getting a true sequel that would actually execute on director Hideaki Itsuno's vision for a hardcore and dark high fantasy RPG was nothing short of a dream for the director himself and many of the game's fans. Until now. Dragon's Dogma 2 actually came out, and I've played it. Thanks, Capcom. I also happen to love it a lot. So let's steel ourselves for combat and talk about the second coming of Dragon's Dogma. Like any good RPG, DD2 starts with you creating your character, the heartless, pawn-commanding Arisen. You can create whoever you want, but the default female character is just classic Claire Redfield, so obviously for the sake of this video, I chose her. You can also choose your starting class, or as it's known here, vocation. Basic roles like fighter, thief, mage, and archer are your starters, but as you level up and gain the necessary equipment and/or items, or meet the right people, you can upgrade to advanced vocations like the great sword-wielding warrior, demonic sorcerer, and heat-seeking magic archer, which was my favorite vocation from the first game. By the way, all of what I just listed was also in Dragon's Dogma 1, and they operate very similarly here in DD2. The new vocations, Spellblade and Trickster, are pretty wild. I spent some time with both of them, not a whole lot, but Trickster was the one I was most interested in, being a genuine saboteur role. You don't deal damage directly, instead create a shadow clone of yourself that distracts enemies, but can also possess them. But of course, for the sake of time, I kicked it old school, opting to max out the sword and shield fighter and archer vocations. Other than your main playable character, you also get to customize a permanent party member, your main pawn. So your pawn is kind of like a secondary character. You can't play as them, but you certainly have to keep an eye on their equipment and upgrade their abilities as they rank up their own vocations. Pawns come from the rift between worlds, and touching a rift stone allows you to summon more of them. You can hire 2 other pawns, either from the rift or out in the field. A lot of these pawns actually come from other players, so higher level pawns from other players can oftentimes prove the most useful over ones that you find from exploration. High level pawns cost rift crystals that you can find by exploring the world. You can't just summon a level 300 Genethan Parkfield. Early on, you actually have to pick and choose those higher level enemy stompers. The Rift Crystal system is an interesting balance tool because as you level up, the selection of pawns does as well, making them cost less Rift Crystals. In all of my time playing DD2, I found a ton of RC and never really struggled to summon any particular pawn to get through my adventures. I wouldn't be surprised if at some point in the future Capcom sells this in-game currency, but I hope they don't because the system is perfectly fine the way it is, but I guess we'll see. Crafting the perfect party is really fun. I had my main pawn on the mage and sorcerer roles throughout my playthrough, but that didn't stop me from summoning other pawns with more black magic elemental skills, while I spec'd my own into a more supportive role that would heal and buff the party. It's kind of crazy how viable any party formation can be with a little imagination. I can fully see how powerful a band of fighters would be in taking down a troll or cyclops all together, climbing its limbs and hacking away at its eyes, or even a group of sorcerers utterly annihilating anything with a cascade of elements. Having the ability to change yours and your pawn's vocation at will offers up endless player expression with this system. There's so much room to experiment and have fun with. Combat in the first game always felt great, but in DD2, the all-new RE Engine animation framework really sells how visceral and impactful each melee swing feels. Every arrow lands with such ferocity too, splattering into targets, shooting violent blood spurts everywhere. I was really impressed in my first few hours of the game. Everything felt so realistic. DD2 is a very tactile, interactive experience. There's little to no automation here, so things like climbing, fighting, interacting with people, these are things that you have to input on your controller at all times. And I know that sounds insane, just me describing it, but Dragon's Dogma 2 does all of what it does in such an engaging way. It's not just the combat system that got a lot of attention, but everything, including basic exploration. It's just a damn good feeling game. As you'd expect, killing lesser fiends and big bosses awards XP, and compared to DD1, I felt like the first 25 levels zoomed right by. Vocations also fly by, but until you reach rank 5, where getting over that halfway hump will take you some time. Getting that level up and rank up pop was incredibly satisfying every time. And since there are so many vocations to choose from, you always kind of have something to play towards, a goal to accomplish. But in this game's case, you're getting like a fully fleshed out, beautifully designed action RPG class system. Before, I said even exploring felt like it got a lot of attention, and that mostly comes from how well constructed the open world of Vermund is. It's an incredibly diverse and well thought out place. The world map is split into 2 countries, Batal and Vermund. It's funny because after watching a few trailers, I imagined the scale of this game's world in my mind as much smaller, but after 20 hours of questing across Vermund alone was when I finally unlocked Batal. I'm not saying that it takes that long on every playthrough to get to that luscious desert, I'm just saying that it took me that long. There is just that much to do in Vermund. Towns and settlements are dotted all across the various landscapes. More pawns and people can be seen traveling betwixt. DD2 feels much more alive and way less empty than its predecessor game. Like that first game, the city of Vernworth feels suspiciously like Gran Soren from DD1. A similar shop, street, and castle layout greet you as you cross its threshold, but speaking of spending coin, everything is so expensive in this game. I guess it's worth it for the fashion because the armor sets are hot AF. Too bad you need to save up like a full day's worth of treasure hunting to afford like 1 new shirt or sword. Hey, I guess it's just further encouragement to explore. And speaking of that, the only semi-automated thing in Dragon's Dogma's gameplay loop is traversal. So sprinting around the landscape allows you to auto-climb smaller terrain, and it feels amazing. You still have to be considerate about where you trek because you might fall off a cliff. This kind of thing comes into play when doing combat as well, and those moments are always genuinely intense. On more than one occasion, I had to take up more of a tactician role, commanding my pawns on where to stand and to stay close to me, lest they get batted off into the abyss. I think one of the best things DD1 and 2 do is give you that feeling of venturing a high fantasy countryside with a group of D&D weirdos, going on treasure hunts, solving mundane issues for townsfolk, or the coolest stuff like taking down griffins and other seismic threats. Traveling at night is a real challenge, not only due to low visibility, but that's when a lot of the scarier monsters show themselves. In the early game, resting at taverns and avoiding the night is imperative. This can create quite the challenge, but you can also camp to pass the time. Bonfires are literally everywhere in the open world. Once you buy a house, the game gets so much easier, and it was at that point where I remembered that I was playing a true hardcore role-playing game. DD2 has just enough uncanny, cool action gameplay and monsters, and just enough simulation to balance itself out, creating such an addictive minute-to-minute gameplay loop. I miss when games kind of required me to have my brain turned on at all times to succeed. Basically what I'm saying is, mostly everything you do in this game feels extremely rewarding. I also found myself way more attached to the pawns I'd summon because they feel more useful now, especially with their much improved AI, seeking out items and using all their advanced combat tricks to protect you and themselves. Even though they still ramble off the same 4 lines about wolves and caves and everything you'd expect straight out of DD1, all of this pawn camaraderie and well-made world design has to be as good as it is, because Dragon's Dogma doesn't actually have a traditional fast travel system. So for a lot of this game, you have to get around on foot with these pawns. There are other limited ways of quickly getting around, like using fairy stones that warp you back to port crystals that you can find or place around the world. Yes, newcomers, you heard that right. You have to actually manually place some of the fast travel beacons. A brand new addition for this sequel is the ox cart system. With it, you can travel to different towns. Taking the ox cart allows you to sleep through the ride, getting you to your destination faster, effectively acting like fast travel. Ox carts aren't immune to the elements or enemies, however, so you can and will be stopped by whatever ferocious freaks happen to be in its way. It's all just so immersive and cool. You feel like you're a member of this world, with how enemies can fight each other, and how you can see ox carts departing from cities without you, forcing you to actually wait for the next transport. It goes back to what I said about the game feeling realistic. It's genuinely impressive how well all of this works together. Another very real thing about DD2 is how questing works. For a lot of your travels, quest givers will mark destinations on your map, but sometimes you won't actually get a lead on what you have to do, forcing you to be a real investigator. Asking around and gathering info from townsfolk and bringing mysterious documents you may find to the right people, like guard captains or magistrates, will reveal helpful information or even get you your quest marker. One set of missions saw me infiltrating one of the main castles to gather a bunch of different leads, but I couldn't just walk through the front door without getting pummeled to death. So I thought, why don't I use this castle outfit that I found in the sewers? And it actually worked. I was doing legitimate social stealth in Dragon's Dogma. It was so cool. DD1 had a lot of great quests as well, but some could border on the typical MMO, kill 10 rabbits or wolves or whatever, and that may have set an expectation for what the game was going to be for some people. In DD2, the most mundane design you'll be facing are fetch quests, but they all mostly lead to something interesting happening by the end, and no two quests ever play out in the same way. Another thing you can do to investigate leadless quests is hire pawns that have quest information from their players' saved data. This allows them to guide you to quest objectives in this very strange and cool meta way. This type of design is legitimately refreshing, innovative, and incredibly rewarding when you figure all of this out on your own. The funny thing is, this type of thing was always in the first Dragon's Dogma game, but now with DD2's fully interconnected open world and extremely immersive happenings, experimental gameplay mechanics like this have finally come to fruition. No longer are you plagued by buggy pawn AI or loading screens that overstay their welcome. You're just in the game and expected to figure out what to do next in such a non-condescending way. I love the lack of hand-holding in this game. It's so cool, and I want to see more of this in RPGs in the future. With a decreased emphasis on telling you where to go next, you're left to explore the environments around you to your heart's content. I loved finding fully handcrafted cave and hideout systems and derelict towns chock full of monsters and valuable loot all by myself, or with the help of a pawn. The game is packed full of emergent gameplay, with boss monsters showing up when you least expect them. Tenacious griffins and minotaurs have ruined my scenic travels more times than I'd like to admit, but it was always fun absolutely dunking on them with my personally constructed, overpowered party of psychos. Going from a dreamlike grotto, facing off against a high-level minotaur and barely scraping by, to climbing out of it to safety, emerging into a misty village, was something that left my jaw on the floor, and moments like this happen all the time. Massive monsters will just fight each other, leaving you to decide how to or not to engage. I'd rather not keep telling you about the cool random encounters I came across, cause uncovering this stuff is DD2's main pleasure, in my opinion. Before we talk about the story, I wanted to let you guys know that I got extensive time with the PC and PS5 versions of DD2. I played mostly on PC, and it was a fairly solid experience on my 4090. I did get many frame drops in towns and cities, or whenever a lot of chaos was taking up all of my screen space. Console frame rate is unlocked, but only ever hits 30 FPS. In some cases, even dipping below that. PS5 wasn't unplayable by any means, but it sure is a night and day experience going from PC to console. I'm glad the frame rate is unlocked, because if we ever get like a PS5 Pro or Xbox Super Dex, this game will hopefully adapt to the increased power those consoles will hopefully thankfully offer, giving console players the ideal visual experience. Listen, I just played like 100 hours of FF7 Rebirth on graphics mode, and that game had my eyes legitimately strained for most of the journey. I took it happily, though, to experience that great game. So a bit of low frame rate here isn't too much of an issue for me personally, but your mileage will vary. I was so excited seeing all of the same DD1 creator names in the opening credits at the start. I was like, oh man, they're finally doing it. And then the game literally does a Dragon's Dogma 1 community meme, but as a AAA cutscene that I won't spoil because it was fantastic. I knew I was in for a great time. So without getting into it too deeply, I will say that Dragon's Dogma 2's story is, in my opinion, more immediately interesting than the first title, and kind of stays that way for the most part. I didn't really find myself groaning at any particular scenario during the story, like I constantly did in my many playthroughs of DD1. Right off the jump, the game delivers a host of different plot points that all begin your Arisen's journey. In the first game, you're a villager who gets attacked by a dragon, losing their heart in the process. From there, you gain this ethereal bond to that dragon, and the hunt to reclaim your heart begins. Slowly, you uncover more mysteries that may or may not even deal with said dragon, and all of it was presented in this very slow burn way. Eventually, that story picks up with some genuinely interesting and quite meta storytelling, but all of that happens really far into the game. In DD2, there's a plot point presented early on that had me caring about everything I was supposed to do right away, making the dragon hunt feel almost like a secondary objective. DD2 is filled with awesome moments from action set pieces, espionage like I mentioned, and even, dare I say it, about a Dragon's Dogma game, romance. My one major issue is something that also hurt DD1's storytelling, and that's the fact that most characters you interact with are, well, plainly boring. Sure, there are some intriguing players in this tale, but a lot of the NPCs you talk to aren't the most memorable. There are also a lot of, oh my god, I need to be careful here, low effort performances scattered throughout the main and side quest content. Never enough to kill my excitement or lust for adventure, but they do stick out like a sore thumb at times. Thankfully, the story constantly delivers on exciting moments that drive you forward, so you're never left thinking about how bad some of the characters can be for too long. If you played the first game, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about here. The game also does some interesting stuff with your pawn, which had me worried about their well-being. And that's where I'll stop, because much like the title's Emergent gameplay, the story's also got a bunch of surprises in store for you. Dragon's Dogma was always a game ahead of its time, fantastically flawed in its own right, but also extremely charming. I'm really glad Capcom gave the staff another chance to prove themselves with this IP, because I think what they've made this time is something remarkable. For me, it's got very few flaws, and I really just want to keep playing it. It's strange to say in my lifetime, but I think it's finally the Dragon's Dogma series' time to shine. Check it out if you loved games like Elden Ring or the recent Zeldas. DD2 is an incredibly rewarding, memorable title, worthy of your heart.
Is that it, Arisen? I think I see a cave over there. Oh no. Look out, Arisen. A griffin. Here, take the fairy stone. I swear it works. It works, I promise. Take it. Take it now.